Hi, I'm Lisa Ray. The great Canadian book today is Late Nights on Air by Elisabeth Hay. So let's launch right in. It's really interesting because it's a very strong ensemble piece. Set in the Northwest Territories, part of the country I haven't been to, but I'd like to go to because Yellowknife, the city in which the novel is set, seems to take on its own character. It seems to become one of the group of people of the book. And here's a passage that kind of captures that. A rudimentary place of 10,000 people named after an indigenous tribe that used knives made of copper, and in many ways it was a white blot on the native landscape. But it was as far north as most Southerners had ever come. It was north of the 60th parallel and shared in the romance of the North, emanating not mystery, but uniqueness.
You really do get in touch with who you are and what a beautiful place this is, and it's very unique.
It had no breathtaking scenery, no mountains, no glaciers. In the winter, not even that much snow. But after a while, it grew on them, on some of them at least, on the ones who would never forget, who would think back on their lives and say, my time there was the most vivid time in my life.
The most important thing in any book are the people in the book. And Elisabeth Hay's characters, especially for me, the Dido Paris character, are the reason why I kept reading, or the biggest reason why I kept reading, why I wanted to know what happened to her.
It's hard to really see one main character in Late Nights on Air because really you've got all of these lives kind of intersecting. I think what that does is that it underlines the importance of community in such a remote location.
One of the important characters in Late Nights on Air is Dido. She's a very interesting cat. I mean, she's quite exotic. She's not Canadian. She's very sensual, very comfortable in herself and in her body. And here's a great passage about her and a little bit more about Yellowknife as well, which again is one of the other characters in the story. He couldn't imagine this beautiful woman, whose manner he could only describe as regal, lasting very long in a town like Yellowknife. And when he asked about her intentions, she said she had no idea whether she'd even stay in Canada. Canada, she pronounced with a certain contempt. Canadians were spoiled, she said. Look at the size and weight of their over-crammed garbage cans, the number and newness of their cars, the houses standing unoccupied, the closets bursting with clothes, the daily showers. She didn't go on, but she could have. Her ex-husband's family had used water as if there were no tomorrow. But with her sense of economy and quality, in the Netherlands, even a tea towel was made to last for decades. With her sense of history, tragedy, and time, she knew better than these dishwashing guzzlers, these showering fools, these lawn lovers and land wasters. Yellowknife, however, was different. Here, she felt that she'd stepped backwards into small-town life, especially in the unplanned old part of town, where there was outdoor plumbing and the streets were unpaved and had names like Ragged Ass Road. Such a curious mixture the city was of brand new and raw old, of government buildings and beer parlors and bush plains and little shack-like houses close to the water which seemed to lie in all directions, as did the vast wilderness. The place was full of opportunities, she said, especially if you were white, and even if you were a woman.
It is almost impossible for the characters to ignore, particularly in the summer when all is light and light just infuses everything. And the characters seem to be compelled to be outside. And I think that to be in that space, it comes across that you are almost inseparable from the land, and that's what really came across in Late Nights on Air.
The landscape of Late Nights on Air is a strong player. Not just Yellowknife, the city, but the Arctic around it.
Here's another really vivid and descriptive passage. Dido's unconventional beauty went hand in hand with the light. Officially, the June sun set close to midnight and rose 3 hours later, but it never got dark. Dusk, yes. Between sunset and sunrise, there was a soft sort of dusk, and the street lights came on, but nobody needed them or noticed them. The constant light was like endless caffeine. One of the features of the book is we learn about the process of radio. And we also learn it through the characters. One of the characters, Gwen, as she herself is embarking on this journey, we get an insight into what she's experiencing. Over the summer air came footsteps in the snow. Gwen had learned from Jim Murphy the trick of kneading cornstarch in a plastic bag to duplicate the sound. Also, how to make ocean waves by sloshing the contents of a hot water bottle back and forth. Generally, she was alone at the station as she aired her playful sound effects, but sometimes Eddie haunted the record library until she signed off at 1 in the morning. He had a key to the station too, and a few times she had gone home, leaving him to lock up. The mistakes don't matter, he informed her one night after she stumbled over a station ID and apologized on air. It's the recovery that counts. If she had a nickel for every one of his smiles, she'd have 10 cents. She nodded sheepishly, preferring Harry's way of phrasing the same point. I learned that a mistake is just something you go on from. Harry's advice gave her a route to follow, a path forward. Somehow Eddie managed to exchange one form of stress for another.
These characters make a real point of talking for no one. I thought that was so cool, the way she was able to bring out the idea. Who is listening to the radio at 3 in the morning?
Harry falls for Dido based on the sound of her voice on the radio. Hay also pays particular attention to sound in other parts of the novel. Harry actually says that what matters more is not sound effects, but the effects of sound. And this is shown in the way that different sounds in the characters' lives have connected to their memories.
These characters have a story that is playing out. They are interacting, loving, hating, feeling, and the whole is happening when all the world is asleep.
Here's another passage on radio. Harry has a great face for radio, cracked Abe. It was a good line. Gwen would use it from now on. I have a great face for radio. You get to be invisible, Abe went on. You control the interview, you ask the questions, you say when it's over. The theater world is packed with the same kind of people. Extroverted introverts. Dido was biting her thumbnail. That's different. On stage, you lose yourself in a part. In radio, you have to be yourself. Abe leaned back. It's still a performance, Dido. You can't just be yourself on the radio. I thought that's what everybody was trying for. No, you're trying to be almost yourself. You see the difference? You're giving a performance as your natural self. It's not you, said Gwen, thinking aloud, mulling it over. It's almost you, Abe said. In my world, in the world of performance and acting, there's a lot of that goes on. Not just on the set, but the part of the business where you're promoting, trying to talk about something, doing the red carpet stuff. It's interesting where the line is drawn, which part of this is myself, which part of this is almost me, and what am I trying to convey? So that's, I think, why I actually really enjoy what is explored in the book in terms of radio, the idea of being naturalistic in the middle of artifice. How do you do it? What does it mean? It brings up a lot of questions, doesn't it?
Every book, obviously, has to have a focus, and the stronger, the more specific the focus, the stronger the story is. The focus of Late Nights on Air is the summer, the radio station, the group of people. In that respect, it's almost like a sitcom. You have the set, you have the quartet or quintet of people that we are following. It makes for fascinating drama because it is so focused.
I think for me, the elements of a really good book are the world that it creates and how easily it can draw you into that world. And there's a kind of a mystery and alchemy that happens between the reader and the writer, which is really difficult to define, which I almost don't want to overanalyze. You just want to experience. And that experience, once having had a taste of that, you got to go back for more.
At one point, Elisabeth Hay has one of her characters talking about approaching life crabwise. So instead of heading for something dead on, going backwards and sideways to get at it. And in a sense, that's the way she comes at this novel as well. So the story unfolds through so many different characters with very different personalities.
So the book is set in the 70s, a time when a lot of people were thinking about the exploitation of the North. And here's a passage of Gwen sort of thinking about the same thing. Gwen found herself thinking about the vulnerable rivers and birds and plants and animals and old ways of life, all of it unprotected, much of it wary. At the Berger Inquiry, she'd heard that snow geese in late August gathered in the thousands on the Arctic coast, feeding for several weeks on berries and sedges before flying 800 miles nonstop to northern Alberta, then on to the wheat fields further south. On these August staging grounds, said the biologist, the birds were easily frightened by planes overhead and activity on the ground, the noise of a compressor station at a distance of 1.5 miles, or a small aircraft at the same distance was enough to flush them into the air. Similarly, the white whales at the Beaufort Sea were wary of man, yet increasingly exposed. To give birth, they came into the warmer, shallow waters of Mackenzie Bay, now the site, and increasingly so, of offshore drilling for oil and gas. Then there were the caribou. In March, they left their winter range among the trees and slowly traveled north across the tundra, arriving at their calving grounds near the Arctic coast in late May. In early June, after the calves were born, the cows joined together in small, timid clusters, then larger bands, then greater herds that culminated in the post-calving aggregation, the gathering en masse in July that forms a sight over which everyone marvels, a spectacle equal to the long-lost flights of passenger pigeons or the once glorious massing of buffalo. But disturb them while calving, fly a helicopter low in the fog, and you cause the females to be separated from their young with drastic results. At the same time, these creatures were enormously resilient, able to withstand extreme cold and hunger, epic distances, and plagues of maddening flies.
In the background of what's happening to the main characters, there's an inquiry happening by Judge Tom Berger. He is asking everybody who is affected to speak about how they feel about a proposed pipeline to go through the Mackenzie Valley. And voice is important here because all of the voices of the people living in Yellowknife and on the lands around them are going to be heard by him before he makes a decision about whether that pipeline can go ahead.
Lorna's short testimony was greeted by a shuffling of feet, a certain embarrassment. Berger, unfailingly polite, thanked her. At every one of these hearings, the atmosphere was serious, unhurried. People wanted to express themselves. Frequently, someone would say, as a young woman was saying now, "I didn't intend to speak tonight. I just intended to listen." However, after listening to the last person, I felt I had to speak. I think it's time we believed in the native people. This is their land. A Dene fellow went to the microphone after that. "Like myself," he said, "I'm a young man. I'm only 23 years old, and I'm thinking about my kids." Harry would see this man again on a cold winter's day under circumstances so different he wouldn't recognize him at first. Today, I was parking my truck downtown. Yes, I parked my truck because I was going to be gone about half an hour, but I was gone 45 minutes. When I got back to my truck, I got a ticket, and it was going to cost me $3. I was thinking, well, this is Dene land. They should at least ask us before they do their regulations. At least they should ask the chiefs. They should say, "What do you think?" There was a murmur of sympathy from the audience. Some nodded their heads. Before the white people came to Yellowknife, kids used to be learning lessons from their parents. Our kids don't listen now, and even the dogs. We don't have any good dogs now. All the white people came and brought their small dogs around. They're all mixed up now. Everything they're spoiling. They spoiled the water too. They spoiled the land. The hall was quiet now. I just hope the government listens to us, he said, and pushed back his chair. So, this is all I wanted to say. Here's another descriptive passage about the dramatic changes in the landscape in Yellowknife. Around Yellowknife, the miniature birches and poplars change color in August. For about 2 weeks, they were a ravishing yellow gold. It was quite astonishing, but so fast. Every single leaf was on every single tree, and every single leaf was yellow. Further south, color gathered on some leaves as others fell, and you only ever got a piece of the whole. But here, you had all the glory at once, and then it was gone. In September, it snowed enough to cover the ground, and the roads turned icy. They wouldn't see water on the streets again until April.
The novel moves from life in the frontier town of Yellowknife to a 6-week canoe and hiking trip that 4 of the characters take to the Barrens north of the tree line.
Some of the strongest scenes in the story happen on the canoe trip, which is taken very much in nature, where you have, as it were, city folk or near city folk fighting it out against fairly primitive conditions.
This trip is described in such passionate detail, and all of the things that the characters are absorbed by, ranging from the lichen to the caribou herds to experiences with bears and birds and even the expanse of sky, and even down to details of what it's like to canoe through ice. These experiences are enticing and really absorbing in the novel.
Although they had what seemed like all the space in the world and all the time, they were committed to a definite destination. The Twin Otter would come back for them on July 27th at Beverly Lake, 500 miles from here. And so time and space were in potential conflict. The next day, their first full day, they deliberately took it easy, exploring the site of Old Fort Reliance near the mouth of the Lockhart River. They paddled to the ruins after breakfast and discovered a site of great loveliness. It was like a park of white and green moss and lichen, with spruce trees arranged as though planted. They followed a path and then a wider one, almost a driveway through the natural park. The trees had tiny buds. They were heading backwards, they realized, into a much later spring of lingering ice and fresh snow on the hills in the morning, melted by early afternoon. Eleanor said she could picture Jane Austen walking here. It looked so civilized, so groomed. There were 3 perfectly shaped birches and 2 graves, fenced with weathered slats, one a child or infant's grave, tiny, the other larger. The past is as close, Eleanor said to Ralph, as I am to you. Now we continue further into the canoe trip, where Gwen has a very powerful experience. Gwen had climbed the wooded slope that rose gently behind the cabin, looking for signs of hornbeam, and finding them in the axe cuts in old stumps that she'd read about. She had her eyes down to negotiate the branch-littered ground, the thick ground cover. A little further and she thought she might get a fine view of the river below. In the northwest corner of this fringe of trees between cabin and open barrens, she expected to find the windbreak of stones Hornby had erected from which they watched for caribou. In her mind, she was with Hornby and Edgar and Harold Adlard as they made the same ascent, alone or together, early on when they were healthy and strong, and then later when they were desperate. Once, they saw 30 caribou in the distance and thought salvation was at hand, but the animals disappeared before they could get close to them. She turned to look south towards the river, but the twisted, slow-growing trees, some of them at least 400 years old, still blocked the view. She turned back and saw something blondish-brown out of the corner of her eye. 50 feet away? They aren't huge animals. They don't have to be huge. It lifted its nose and sniffed. Experts say to avoid eye contact, to back away quietly, not to turn and run. Gwen's scream coincided with her seeing a set of small, black, gleaming eyes. She turned and ran. It was like going full tilt down a flight of stairs covered in books. She felt her feet go out from under her even as she tumbled forward, and instinctively she grabbed at the nearest tree and slowed her descent at the expense of her arm. Her right shoulder wrenched out of its socket. Then she was lying in a small heap, the pain so intense she couldn't make a sound. Her head slid forward to rest on the ground, and she bit down on the dead branch that offered itself, aware in a flickering part of her brain of an age when biting down on wood offered the only consolation in moments of physical agony. Her shoulder wasn't there, nauseatingly not there, but her heart was bouncing her off the ground. She heard the bear beside her, then behind her. She heard its heavy breathing. She felt it nose her left leg, and she bit harder into the wood. It nosed her leg a second time, and she closed her eyes, lay completely still apart from her thumping, cartoonish heart. She smelled the animal, heard the saliva bubbling in its mouth, kept as quiet as she always had at the dining room table when a wave of fury would darken her father's face. She braced herself for more pain and heard the bear moving and realized it was moving away. When they found her, she was coming slowly towards them like a shell-shocked survivor of the trenches or the highway. She saw them and sank to her knees. And that's Late Nights on Air by Elisabeth Hay, a great Canadian book.